For centuries, survival has never been about brute strength alone. It has been about not being seen, not being detected, and not becoming a target in the first place. Long before thermal drones, satellites, and infrared sensors existed, people were already fighting the same problem in simpler forms. How to avoid detection when heat, smoke, light, or movement could give you away. What we now casually call ghost shelters are not modern inventions. They are the refined descendants of concealment techniques tested in wars, resistance movements, and survival situations where being invisible meant staying alive. The term sounds modern, but the concept is ancient. A ghost shelter is not about hiding from sight alone. It is about blending into the environment so completely that detection tools, whether human sensors or machines, fail to register anything unusual. During World War II, Cold War conflicts, and guerrilla wars that followed, armies learned painful lessons about heat, contrast, and environmental deception. Those lessons quietly shaped how concealment works today. Why heat exposure became the silent killer of concealment. Once warfare moved beyond eyesight and into detection by heat, concealment rules changed permanently. So, thermal detection doesn't really care about camouflage patterns, darkness, or even shadows. It only sees contrast, right? Anything that's warmer or cooler than its surroundings just pops out. Back in World War II, pilots already faced this problem, sort of indirectly, when exhaust heat made their aircraft visible against those cold night skies. Ground forces ran into this challenge through things like steam body warmth in the snow, and, even campfires that could betray entire units. This really forced a shift in thinking. Suddenly, survival wasn't just about hiding objects anymore. It was about managing heat itself. Soldiers learned, sometimes the hard way, that even the best bunker was useless if it created a thermal signature that stood out from the landscape. This realization, honestly, laid the foundation for what we now call ghost shelter logic. During the Second World War, resistance fighters and forward units often built shelters partially underground, not simply to avoid bombs, but to stabilize temperature. You see, Earth acts as a natural thermal buffer. Subsurface shelters maintained a temperature closer to the surrounding ground, reducing contrast during cold nights or hot days. Even without modern sensors, this reduced visibility to reconnaissance aircraft and patrols trained to spot unusual signs. Another lesson came from winter warfare. Snow-covered environments made warmth stand out instantly. Soldiers learned that insulating from the inside mattered just as much as hiding from the outside. Shelters that leaked heat upward created telltale melt patterns. The most effective positions were those that maintained equilibrium with their surroundings, rather than fighting them. The core principle behind any ghost shelter is thermal balance, not insulation alone. Insulation traps heat, which is useful for comfort, but, honestly, can be dangerous for concealment if that heat escapes unevenly. Historical shelters worked because they spread heat slowly and evenly, allowing it to dissipate into surrounding materials rather than venting outward. In practical terms, this meant thick walls of earth, stone, or packed debris, minimal internal heat sources, and airflow that prevented heat buildup without creating visible exhaust points. These weren't comfort-focused shelters. They were, survival-focused spaces designed to avoid detection rather than maximize warmth. One of the least discussed aspects of concealment is actually geometry. Flat surfaces and sharp angles create contrast. Rounded, irregular forms, they blend more naturally into terrain. World War II engineers and guerrilla fighters instinctively understood this. even without thermal imaging. Shelters were built to mimic natural features, such as embankments, hillsides, or collapsed terrain. Placement mattered just as much, really. Shelters placed near rocks, trees, or uneven ground benefited from existing thermal noise. A structure that matched the thermal behavior of its surroundings became background rather than signal. One of the hardest sacrifices for concealment has always been comfort. Heat sources such as fires, stoves, or even clustered bodies created thermal spikes. WWII units learned to cook away from sleeping areas, limit open flames, and stagger occupancy when concealment mattered more than warmth. This wasn't theoretical. Entire positions were compromised because of visible heat plumes or concentrated warmth in cold environments. So, thermal drones might feel revolutionary, but they actually operate on the same basic principle as earlier detection methods. Contrast, they're just, a lot better at measuring it. What history really teaches us is that no sensor is magical. Ghost shelters don't actually defeat technology. Instead, they exploit physics. By maintaining thermal consistency with the surrounding environment, they reduce the signal that sensors rely on. The value of ghost shelter knowledge isn't in copying techniques blindly. It's in, understanding the mindset behind them. Concealment has always been about adaptation, not equipment. Every environment demands a different solution, but the principles remain consistent. Minimize contrast, avoid sharp thermal changes, and work with the landscape rather than against it. These techniques didn't disappear. They became institutional knowledge, quietly passed down through military doctrine, engineering practices, and survival training. What changed was public awareness. As technology advanced, people assumed old methods became obsolete. But history proves the opposite. The fundamentals endured because, physics never changed. Ghost shelters are not about tricks. They are about understanding the limits of detection and the power of environment. For those willing to study history seriously, they offer a reminder that survival has always favored the observant, the patient, and the disciplined. If you value deep, uncomfortable truths about warfare, concealment, and survival that go beyond surface-level history, subscribe to Strange History, and honestly, share this episode with others who want to understand how people stayed alive when being seen meant being destroyed.